So good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dipanjan. I am an urban transport planner from the Institute of Urban Transport. Welcome to the fifth breakout session, which is one of the most important and the relevant one on the topic of resilient transport system post-COVID. This session will be moderated by Mr. Ajay Mathur, who is the managing director of the Urban Mass Transit Company Limited, which is an advisory in the field of urban transport. Mr. Mathur has an MBA from the University of Lucknow and has worked extensively on policy formulation and development of schemes to promote urban mobility in India. This session will run for a period of 1.5 hours, which will consist of presentations by 5 panelists. And so I request all the panelists to limit their speaking time to 12 to 15 minutes. Mr. Ajay will intimate the speakers approximately 5 minutes before the closure time. And the rapporteur for this session is Ms. Pooja Pagdar. Without further ado, I hand over this session to Mr. Ajay Mathur. Thank you all for joining. Mr. Ajay Mathur, yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dipanjan. And a very good evening and warm welcome to all those who have joined us online for this virtual session. The subject of today's session is resilient transport systems post-COVID. In particular, I would like to welcome a very distinguished panel of experts who will be sharing their views on the subject. We have with us today Dr. Mangu Singh, who's the Managing Director of Delhi Metro Rail Corporation. We have Laghu Prashar, who's the Deputy Project Head of Smart Sustainable Urban Transport, GIZ India. Mr. Prasanna Parkvardhan, Chairperson and Managing Director of Prasanna Purple Mobility Solutions. Mr. Gerald Olivier, I can't see him whether he's here or not. He's the lead transport specialist in India of the World Bank. And Marcel Chevreul, who's the President ATEC ITS Paris. 2020 will be remembered by us for a very, very long time. It is the year when the world faced a global pandemic in the form of COVID-19. It presented multiple challenges and called for a rapid response, and cities and mobility practitioners across the globe responded to the challenge in most innovative and inventive ways. But in this session, we want to go beyond what has happened and see how we can, in the aftermath of COVID, reimagine urban mobility. And it is an opportunity for us to align it with sustainable development goals. So looking beyond the current crisis, if we can assess how our systems can be made more resilient across multiple dimensions, such as the physical assets, the operations, business models, governance, and financing. So in this session, we hope to learn how the travel demand pattern has changed due to the pandemic or post-pandemic. What is the likely scenario for the future? What initiatives and measures can be taken to reinvigorate the public transport sector, which has been hit the most? How the streets can be reallocated to encourage cycling and walking, and how technology can be leveraged to make transport more resilient. With this opening remarks, I would hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Mangu Singh. Dr. Mangu Singh hardly needs an introduction. He is a civil engineer from University of Roorkee. He has been associated with the DMRC right from its inception in 1997. And whatever we see today, the entire system, in metro system in Delhi, he was instrumental in the development of the system. He's also helping other states develop their metro systems. He's a recipient of multiple awards, and deservingly so, and has been honored with the DSC and DLIT by the MIT and Modi University, respectively. He's a distinguished alumni of IIT Roorkee. Over to you, Dr. Manus.
Thank you, Mr. Mathur, for this introduction. What I propose to speak to you all today, a bit of our experience during this COVID scenario, and then learning from this, and also the future expectations. In brief, I'd like to talk. Next slide, please. Right. Next slide. This is just a introduction of Delhi Metro. Today we have a network of about 390 kilometers spread across Delhi and NCR regions. And another 104-kilometer network is in progress at different stages. Next. Now, this is the slide showing the impact of COVID. So if you see from the comparison given from September 19 till now, September 21, you can see a period where train services were completely shut. March, April to August 20, restarted in September only. And then when reopening of services with a lot of restrictions on the number of passengers and also the protocol. Yeah, the pointers is okay. So slowly we reached to a level of say 25 lakhs per day in February, March 21. And then again we had second wave. We had to close the services for again in the month of May, June, and then restarted. And today we are again in a position where almost daily ridership is around 27 lakhs, as against the, if you see the September 19 or October 19, around 57 or so. So we are almost half of what we used to be prior to COVID. The remarkable thing is that the passenger car kilometer and the number of trains in service, number of trips continue to be more or less same as it used to be prior to COVID. So this is one thing which we decided right in the beginning and has proved to be very successful. We decided right in the beginning at the time of the reopening of the services that we will provide the maximum capacity so that the space available for passengers is maximum and it is easy to maintain the COVID protocol, the social distancing and all that. So this is one thing which I like to highlight. Next. So this is this table is showing what we saw in previous slide: passenger kilometer as well as journeys is almost half, 47%, 48%, and car kilometer and number of cars more or less same, 2%, rather slightly more, 2% higher. So this is the scenario. Next. Now, this has been possible. When I say today the ridership is around 50%, it should not be taken as an indicator of the real demand. Because even today there are restrictions on number of passengers to be taken inside the train. No standing passengers are allowed, only sitting passengers are allowed. So this level of traffic today is not an indication of the actual demand. And in fact, we believe that we are not able to provide service to large number of commuters who otherwise are willing to use our service. On resumption of service, the major challenge was to develop confidence among the commuters regarding their safety and hygienic conditions in the system. And this was the most important aspect of our actions after the reopening of the services. So we took all those precautions like thermal scanning, sanitization, intensive cleaning of the touch points, disinfection of all the points which are frequently being likely to be touched by the passengers. Next. And this was actually ensured. We took number of measures. The entry points to the stations were restricted. The frequency of trains were increased even during non-peak hours also. And then monitoring of the crowd as a live real-time basis in order so that we can know exactly at a particular point of time that how many passengers we can allow to let into the station. And this actually led to crowding outside the stations, long queues outside the stations. So in order to give again the real-time information to the passengers, we used to give this on social media, the waiting time outside the stations at the real crowded stations also. In addition, we then facilitated the vaccination camps at 32 stations. We facilitated the vaccination camp. Then this was again an opportunity to promote the cashless transaction. The necessity had arisen because of the fear of spreading the coronavirus. So if you see the cashless transaction increased from 29% to 69%, then promote number of activities, the community participation through our videos, signages, announcement, etc. And then increase the fresh intake inside the trains and stations air conditioning. So on one hand, since the occupancy was less, the otherwise the fresh air was available, more fresh air was available because the system was designed for much more passengers. And in addition to that, we increased the further intake, the circulation time. As I mentioned, we even went for sanitization through UV technology, route-operated lift, so that passengers are not required to touch the buttons, and then number of stickers, signages, just to ensure the just to see that the passengers has got the confidence. Next. We utilized this period when the services were stopped. We utilized this for many good things like major maintenance work, which otherwise were not possible because of the long clock requirement and all that. Like rail replacement, remodeling of the station, overhauling of rolling stock, all these. Next. Another area which we really utilize this is use this time for extensive online training to our employees in the form of refresher course, induction course, reshuffling, etc. Large 4,400 employees. Next. Similarly, many such works, change of split ACs, LED, and also things like managing the load, because the fixed part of the electricity tariff was on our head. So we took some measures to reduce the impact of that. Next. During this period, we have also taken some measures to indigenize, like AFC gate, equipment control, smart media validator, these were indigenized. AFC gate alarm system for information of full token container. This appears to be a very small thing, but let me explain, this is very important. At our gates, the tokens are absorbed in a container, and the container, when it gets full, there is an alarm, and the gate becomes, gate stops working, and then somebody will come and then change this container. So during this time, we took a drive, and an alarm was, a sensor was put in the container, which will give an alarm in the station control that now the container is going to be full. So this stoppage of gate time is reduced drastically. We did so many more works like that. Next please. This again in signaling area, did some work which has resulted in substantial saving in man hours, upgradation of banknote acceptor on the vending machines, then installation of CCTV in some of the trains which were not there earlier. Next. The expenditure side also, we had taken a lot of measures, like on the essential maintenance activities which are planned. Then running trains in energy saving is more, rationalization of train timing and timetabling, and many other overhead costs, administrative costs have been curtailed to minimize the impact of this COVID. Next. So after the resumptions, now the gradually the passenger level is picking up. We are also relaxing. Number of additional gates are being now opened. The important thing is that the people have that much patience. By and large, they follow the guidelines. Next. In addition, we have introduced feeder electric buses during this period. And then adding 25 low-floor electric buses. This has been done. Ultimately, this 100 e-buses will be in position shortly. Next. So learning from, we tried to understand the learning from across the world. We have access to the information available with different metro, because we are a member of COMET and NOVA. So these are some of the learning. No direct correlation between use of public transport system and transmission of COVID-19. If you take all precautions and like we are taking, so this is one, an analysis of public transport ridership in multiple cities over the past 3 months shows no correlation with the rise or fall of local COVID-19 cases. Mask wearing has been shown to be effective at reducing person-to-person transmission. Public transport riders generally talk little while using public transport. On many urban public transport system, airflow is enhanced. This we also did, and without even knowing that others are doing, we took this decision right in the beginning. So the public perception and press coverage of COVID-19 transmission risk in transit has created more fear than is warranted by the evidence. I don't think in our scenario this is applicable, but this is an experience outside in some of the cities. Next. Thanks. I will just like to give one my impression about future. We believe that the level of traffic today which we have, as I mentioned, is no indication of actual demand. We believe that once the things are normalized, the level of passengers in DMRC will be back to normal, because the level of comfort, the availability, the reliability of the services, this will certainly necessitate the people coming back to the public transport system and PMRC in particular. We are very confident. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mangu Singh, for a most informative presentation. It was interesting to learn about the innovative measures taken to counter the threat of COVID, and also how the time was utilized to maintain and improve the maintenance of the assets and the various cost-cutting measures. And I hope somebody is listening and allows, lifts the restriction on the metro services. Let's hope that happens soon. Since we are running short of time, I'll straight away go to the next presenter. That's Mr. Laghu Parashar. Laghu is the Deputy Project Head, a Smart SUT of GIZ India. He's a transport planner with more than 17 years of experience and has worked on various mobility systems across India. He is now presently leading the GIZ initiative in partnering cities, states, ministries in implementing measures in sustainable mobility and building their capacity. Laghu, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Just to confirm, my presentation is visible. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Okay, after it's I'm going to present about the trends in travel demand and the emerging trends across the globe, and of course in India also due to the COVID-19. So somewhere in 2019 when we did during this study in GIZ during the first wave of the COVID-19, and we tried to find out, we did a global study where we collected the views of the global leaders from various sectors, including mobility, including real estate, all across the globe, and try to find out their perspective about various aspects, about trends in the real estate, trends in the commercial, residential, and the travel demand. So this was the perception. Most of the views of this group was towards that there will be a huge trends towards as far as individual modes are concerned, be it walking, cycling, or the personal vehicles. And this is something which was done in the when there was a first wave, and now we are gradually moving towards that only. It was also asked that how the real estate market would be. So many of the respondents of the view that yes, there will be change, there will be huge reduction in the office sizes and as far as commercial demand is concerned. So all these things are collectively somewhere, as we know that transportation is a derived demand end of the day. Okay, it does not have its own demand, and transportation demands are dependent on the activities in and around the cities. Okay, and when due to the COVID, all these activities are going to be impacted. What got impacted, it is ultimately going to impact the transportation demand also, which is obvious. So somewhere, as we know, that COVID-19 has disrupted all the activities around us, be the way we live, the way we work. Okay, and of course, it has impacted the way we travel also and how much we travel. So a right word, if I may say, is like it is COVID-19 nothing but a disruptor, which we have seen in the last century. And any disruption comes with a positive and negative impacts. Okay, so is in the case of COVID-19 also. So we have seen how work from home and flexible working timing has become a trend. It was never used to be it was never used to be previously before COVID-19. It was never been the trend so much, maybe with a few companies, but now it is being gradually adopted largely. So many of the company has now permanently have shifted, as we can see, on a flexi work hour and work from home. As a effect of that, the digital trips, basically the physical trips has been converted into the digital calls. So this particular session is also a classical example. If not COVID, all of us would have been traveling some city and making this presentation to each other in physical format. So all those trips have been somehow converted into these digital calls. We have seen it huge trends towards the cycling, okay, which in various cities and parts and various cities has started taking initiative in that direction. A reverse flow has been observed in from the tier 1 city to tier 2 to tier 3 cities, which is again a kind of a disruptor. Uh, Unattractive and unsafe PT for choice rider. So unfortunately, as Mr. Mangu Singh also presented, somehow a fear has been created around the public transport. Of course, as he said, there is no example and no international research is available which can prove that public transport help in spreading the COVID-19. But despite that, only the choice riders are going away from the public transportation system, and they are traveling only if it is unavoidable. So this has, as we can see, it has both impact in a positive and negative direction. So I think this has very well explained by Maghu Singh sir also that the biggest challenge which is being faced by because of COVID-19 is the public transportation system. While the ridership is going down, and there are expenses to keep the public transport running with the same capacity, with a higher level of hygiene, ultimately revenues are going down. In long term, this is going to impact the delays in investment in terms of fleet expansion and the technology enhancement. The technology enhancement like electric mobility, digitalization, which were planned probably in last 2 years or 3 years, because of such a significant loss in the revenue, all these investments are going to be postponed if a right intervention or financial intervention or incentives were not given to the public transport agency. So what are the emerging trends? So globally, it has been seen that the trends are similar. Trends are in both two extreme direction. While the cities, globally cities are exploring and a lot of cycling and the walking trends can be observed, but at the same time, there are countries which are also facing high level of congestions, okay, as compared to the pre-COVID time also. A recent study in Israel come up with a study that they suggest that 20% congestion has been increased. In India, in last 1.5 years, the sale of second-hand cars has increased significantly. And there are new market players has entered as far as second-hand cars selling and purchase is concerned. So these both kind of trends globally and India can be very clearly observed. A new concept has been emerged like a 15-minute cities. Obviously, it is a trend towards avoiding the need for travel. Okay, so if your city is a compact city, basically it will be more conducive for the walking and the cycling. If I may take a lever, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. You'll have to wrap up in 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. So yeah, so these are the few trends. If we can observe a higher trends towards in the direction of freight vehicles, because the home delivery has taken a trend. Same in the electric vehicle we have observed. This we have discussed about all the green mobility, pop-up cycling lane. This is something which has also been experimented. Digital tool are being observed too in order to resource optimization of the existing resources what we have in terms of public transportation. Various countries has come up with a stimulus package as far as public transport system concerned. Even the US, Germany, Netherlands, all these countries are investing heavily in the public transport system recovery. So they realize that this is the time they need to invest in the right technologies, and probably this is the right time to do that. So what can be done? Probably, as we discussed, that there are 3 pillars: avoid, shift, and the improve, which we need to take up. And if we don't take action right now, so what we can do is probably a flyover which may require in next 10 years, we may require that flyover in next 5 years. Because if the trends go in the other extreme, which is the congestion, we may not be able to recover. So we need to make a choice about the new normal in the future. Our city need to make a choice, and various action can be taken up. So, but we need to arrest the gain which we have achieved out of COVID-19, both in terms of good trends, both in terms of cycling, walking, all this infrastructure, which we need to provide the proper infrastructure to arrest their trends. So of course, all these NMT investments are required. We require the investment in the bus priority infrastructure, not only in the good buses, but the better buses. Digital trend can be seen recently in the public transport system. Mr. Maghu Singh also said that Even cashless transaction has increased from 29% to 70%. And I must say, thanks to COVID, because digital transaction was never be such a high level of trend in our public transport system in India. But this is something has been observed in last 2 years only. Now, the major problem would remain as far as providing the resilient public transport infrastructure or urban transport infrastructure would remain the funding. Okay, we will never be doing good in as far as the financing of public transport system is concerned. And after the COVID, this will further create is going to be a problem. Okay, we need to find a holistic view that who all are the beneficiary because of the good investment in the urban transport system. It is not only the public transport user, it is a non-public transport user also, because they are getting the less pollution, better livability in the city. There are employment agency. Oh, sorry. There are various activities around the cities which are getting benefited because of the good connectivity of the public transport infrastructure. And as a wider society is also benefited as a lower pollution, accident risk, and increased employment. So all these, not only the public transport system user should be pay for the a good urban transport infrastructure. As a society, has to be mechanism. Few cities started doing this. A mechanism has to work out where the entire society as a whole is making paid for the good public transport system, urban transport infrastructure. Yeah, this is a brief from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Laghu. You touched upon almost all aspects of this session that we were focusing on, but the emerging travel demand scenarios, the behavioral shifts that have taken place, the enhanced focus on the investment in public transport, and how this needs to be financed. We are running about 5-7 minutes behind schedule, so I'll straight away go to our next speaker, that is Mr. Prasanna Patwardhan. Prasanna is the chairman and managing director of Prasanna Purple Mobility Solutions. The group has an array of mobility solutions, including city, intercity, scheduled bus services, hop on, hop off. He has a fleet of over 1,000 vehicles flying across India. And Dr. Mangu Singh gave us an insight into how it impacted Metro and what steps they took. Prasanna hopefully will speak about the impact on the bus sector.
Thank you, Mr. Mathur. Is my presentation visible to everybody?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. And good evening, everybody. Private sector also has been quite badly affected because of this COVID pandemic. So what are the effects? Particularly this lockdown has affected public transport more ways than one. Particularly in private sector, since school and IT companies are mostly closed, out of about 19 lakh buses, about 6 to 7 lakh buses are operated only in this sector. So all those buses are off-road for last so many months. And due to closure of public transport in general, including metro, people are actually forced to use their personal vehicles. So now they have become habitual to using personal vehicles, and getting them back on public transport is going to become challenging. They, of course, are more worried about their safety and hygiene, and that is also one of the reasons why many people are preferring to travel by their own vehicles. Most of the transport companies, whether it is public or private, they're in really bad shape. And workforce, which was working before in public transport, they are mainly blue-collar job workers, drivers, conductors, mechanics, cleaners. So many of them, they have gone back to their hometowns. And because of fear of third wave or again lockdown, not many of them are coming back to the system. And that is why there is a shortage of these people, and it will become a hindrance in growing public transport or bringing public transport back at the same level. Though financial institutions are showing their strong balance sheets today, going forward, I think this could change, because presently, because of multiple RBI schemes, people are surviving, but situation is more bad than we see. Bus manufacturers are also struggling because there are no buyers. Banks are not willing to fund new vehicles. So getting new vehicle is also a challenge. And because of digitization, also there are some positive impacts and some negative impacts. Negative less, positive more. Situation of public transport companies is deteriorating or has deteriorated over a period of 18 months. Even till date, around 40% vehicles are not in operation, or 50% vehicles are not in operations. Many STUs under public-private partnership, they have enforced this force majeure clause, and they are trying to avoid paying operators. That is why private operators' situation is getting worst. And in fact, it is getting bad name to public-private partnerships also. And accounts of many operators have become NPA. And again, that would create a lot of void in the market because many buses will go off-road. Funds to get vehicles on road are also not available. And that is why also getting back to a normal position is going to become challenging. As banks are following up for operators' payments, they are in serious trouble. Operating cost also has gone up, particularly because of this some hygiene, what we need to take care of, sanitization, cleaning of buses. And on top of that, because of fuel escalation, more than 100 rupees diesel, nobody thought that diesel would reach up to that stage. And nobody is prepared. On one side, diesel is going up, and on second side, our rates are not being changed. So city bus ticket rates are almost the same, which they were when our diesel price was 60 rupees. So now from 60, we have reached more than 100, but still our ticket rates are same. So that is also a serious challenge. So what operators in general expect from government is financial support. Financial support in terms of multiple things. Some of the support could come in terms of giving moratorium or giving loan waiver as far as bank is concerned. Then payment of past dues with STUs is a challenge because STUs do not have money. So since they do not have money, even our payments for last 1.5 years are pending with some of the STUs. Apart from that, government should actually give waiver on cess, which is being charged at some percentage or in some fixed amount at state level as well as at central level, sales tax as well as cess. So public transport, they should give some waiver for this tax. A method or mechanism can be worked out, because either they will have to allow us to revise rates or they will have to give fuel at the same price. Something has to be done there. Otherwise, it is becoming critical to operate. Motor vehicle tax are levied, though vehicles are off-road. Some of the states, they have waived off those taxes for a particular period. But overall, since most of the vehicles are off-road or operating under very low occupancy, this taxation needs to be waived. Even penalties which are associated with tax. And if at all, if people need to buy, motivated to buy new vehicles, then next 1 year at least, GST on buying of new vehicles should be waived. So people will get motivated to even buy some new vehicles. There is no insurance coverage today for such kind of calamity. In fact, insurance, why do we take insurance? We take insurance because we do not want to carry any risk. And this was the first time after 100 years, probably, we could see what kind of risk we are facing. And there is no solution with insurance companies for this kind of coverage. So if government comes up with some type of scheme for such kind of coverage, it would also help. Then the relaxation of social distancing. Without social distancing, also public transport companies were losing money. Then in some of the states, social distancing still exists, and in some of the states, it doesn't. So these norms also need to be relaxed. And public transport should be declared as priority sector. Unless it is declared as priority sector, we will not get loans at low rate, project finance, etc., etc. So some benefits which are associated with priority sector, one should get. When government wants to promote one particular area, they give benefits in terms of electricity charges, in terms of taxes, in terms of selling of land to set up an industry. And today, if they look at it that they want to set up public transport again, they should come up with some SOPs so that people are motivated to remain in public transport, and public transport companies which are publicly owned also survive. Coming back to our the situation of public transport, I believe that the situation not today, but even before pandemic is not so great. And that is mostly because public transport is no one's baby. There is absolute absence of coordination between various ministries and implementing agencies. There is absence of integrated planning and administering institute also. There is no institute across the country or even at city level like UMTA, which is able to take care of public transport as a whole. We work in silos, and that is why it is not integrated. Regulation is made by MORTH, schemes are made by MoHUA, DHI, Niti Aayog. State UD ministry makes planning. It is regulated by RTA or RTO. Traffic is controlled by police. Town planning authority defines land allocation. It is no great science how much land is required for depot and how much land is required for bus terminals or multimodal terminal when you know what kind of civilization you have. I am afraid to say that in city or capital, national capital like Delhi, we are unable to increase number of buses for want of land for depot. Very sad state. So one needs to look at all this holistically, and all these agencies which are working in silos today need to come at some consensus and ensure that public transport becomes strong enough to serve people. Then services are expected to be funded and managed by ULBs. Not many ULBs are financially strong. As everybody knows, that tax pyramid is exactly inverse. So maximum tax is collected by center and minimum tax is collected by ULBs. So ULBs have no money. And then ULBs, either ULBs or state transport undertakings, take mandate of operations with no budget allocation. So who is going to give viability gap funding? There is no business plan. So even before taking a tender, nobody knows if in next year, suppose if I'm taking this tender out, how I'm going to support this tender for the next 10 years. But still that tender is out and it is bidded, people start working and then they start struggling for getting viability gap funding. I have seen STUs or SPV people sitting in front of CMs or sitting in front of municipal corporations just to beg for money. They need to literally beg for money. And it is not a good sign to have, because whenever funding comes, that time damage is already done. And that is why situation and quality of public transport is really bad. If one needs to improve quality of public transport, funding has to be before that damage happens and not after that damage has happened. And that, unless we change that, so budgetary provision and planning for long term is must. And in absence of that, we are literally struggling. I again come back to our National Urban Transport Policy of 2006. After 15 years, we are unable to even reach up to a level what we had thought of our country should reach. So look at this policy. Not even 50% things are being done. The basic thing which I have highlighted is people-focused and equitable allocation of road space. How many cities have footpaths where people only walk? In an area where people only walk, there is no footpath. So starting from pedestrian infrastructure, NMT till metro, everybody has to be well thought of. In fact, since Mr. Mangu Singh is here, I would like to request you, sir, that if you build good footpaths in and around metro stations up to 3 kilometers, 2 kilometers, your ridership in metro would go up. People can walk up to metro by walking and your ridership will go up. So I believe that you should have good accessibility to metro stations so that people can actually board metro by walking. So,
Prasanna, you'll have to.
Yeah, I know, I'm running out of time. So I will just finish off in just 5 minutes. So Motor Vehicle Act is outdated and limited to only vehicle regulation, whereas we need People Mobility Act and not Vehicle Regulation Act. And being in concurrent list, operating rules, taxation differ from state to state. It is optional for ULB to operate public transport. It has to be mandatory for ULBs to operate public transport. Then only they will make budget for it. Budget is mostly spent on making roads and not given to public transport. City DC rules are also not aligned to whatever policies we are discussing about. Public transport, in fact, in fact, giving grants, it is being burdened by heavy taxation. There is absolutely lack of coordination between different mode of operators, whether it is metro or private operators, public operators, NMTs, so or even paratransit vehicles. And there is no solution for public to go from door to door with integrated manner. In a seamless way, they cannot get transfers. Then there is no availability of physical or IT infrastructure. And nowadays, charging infrastructure is also becoming very important. Fares are not aligned to expenditure, making it absolutely unviable. Priority is given to personal vehicles. So first thing to be banned in our country is public transport. In any situation, in any crowded area, first thing which is getting banned is bus, whereas it should be other way around. Private vehicles should be banned and public vehicles should be allowed, because 85% of our population does not own any vehicle. And there is no enough budgetary provision to ensure sustainability. I will just wrap up this fast. There is a requirement of institutional framework to facilitate growth of people mobility. So planning and monitoring authorities, infrastructure development authority, training and skill development schools across India, research institute to promote innovative people mobility. How to improve people mobility is a big challenge. To introduce public transport, I have been propagating this for last several years, that whenever we have administrative service education, whether it is for IAS or IPS, there has to be a public transport subject which is taught them when they are actually going to administer those subjects going forward. Then build political consensus to get public transport services as priority sector, then develop right legislative framework, define uniform operating guidelines for level playing field, reduce taxes and levies to allocate sufficient funds for next 10 years to promote sustainable mobility. In integrated mobility, it is important that infrastructure should be developed for people mobility and not vehicle mobility. And IT infrastructure also should be integrated for all mode of transport. And there has to be a standardization in technology. When any operator who adopts technology, there has to be a standard protocol to share data with other operators. And I think in an order to scale up, public-private partnership is inevitable. So to strengthen public-private partnership, I think what is required is to build capacity at STO SPVs to ensure that they are able to plan good network and manage services. Then they should have long-term business plan, and accordingly budget should be provided. Get project rated to solve difficulty in raising debt. Raising a debt for bankable project is very difficult today. Banks have lost faith in public-private partnership. That is why many STUs are not getting funding for their projects. Then getting adherence to concession agreement, selecting operator, more
Prasanna, you have to wrap up now, please.
Yeah, more weightage to be given to technical ability than financial ability. Then do away with reasonable demands, performance security. When operator is expected to receive money, performance security is again asked from operator. So that is also needs to be changed. So I will not take much of your time. I will share this presentation with everybody. And I thank all of you. Let us pray for the better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prasanna, for giving us a totally different perspective from the private sector side on how COVID-19 has impacted the bus sector. Your passion for urban mobility is reflected in your presentation, and you have lots of suggestions, which I hope we'll continue to work on, and some of these would get implemented in the near future. I would now go to my next speaker, Gerald Olivier, who's the lead transport specialist for the World Bank. He focuses on developing solutions to enhance urban mobility, unlock markets for electric mobility, achieve sustainable economic integration through multimodal transport. He has considerable experience of working in China and Central Asia, and was the team leader for their metro and high-speed rail projects. He is a civil engineer and a chartered financial analyst. Over to you, Gerard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mathur. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. First, a pleasure to be with all of you today. A lot of very insightful comments already from the metro side, from the bus side, from Lagu. I'm going to take a slightly different angle, hopefully it will be complementary, and speak about resilient transport system moving forward post-COVID. And I will take some of the work we do together with Chennai as a reference point. Because frankly, we are at a point where we have an opportunity to reinvent urban mobility in many ways. And that means thinking about the system performance, what is the impact of events, whether it's COVID or floods, what are the vulnerabilities within the system in the metropolitan area, how to deal with this integration that Prasanna very rightly pointed out, which is an absolutely major piece moving forward, and create sustainable service delivery, and then conclude. So let me start by speaking about systems performance, because frankly, all cities are now creating comprehensive mobility plan, speaking about accessibility and other dimension. We see more emphasis on quality of service, the citizen experience, obviously always a concern on the efficiency of service delivery, green performance, safety, and a system that can evolve for innovation. But the newcomer is really resilience, where the system needs to be built in ways that are resilient to natural hazard and pandemic. But that's what's happening at the high level. What really matters for metropolitan area is to understand what's happening across the metropolitan space. So each of these big ticket items, big dimensions, can be looked at across the urban space. And here I'm showing the diversity of level of accessibility for a city like Chennai, or a metropolitan area like Chennai, where, depending on where you are, your level of accessibility to jobs by public transport is totally different, right? So we are not speaking about one number. You're speaking about, for each traffic area zone, a very different set of characteristics. So spatially differentiated. But also, ultimately, when you think about resilience of your system, it's important to understand the back and forth, where the trips are generated, what is the trip attraction, what is the difference between morning peak, evening peaks, and the like, because that will help understand how you create a resilient system. And last layer in terms of understanding the granularity of mobility is understanding how trips are conducted. So we use cell phone data to understand how for each of these districts, people are moving by driving, transit, or walking across boundaries between different worlds. By understanding those differences, you start having a fuller picture of what it takes to make the system resilient, not for a few people, but for a metropolitan area. Now, underpinning all of this, and Secretary Mishra pointed out very clearly at the beginning, is data. Data for planning, operation, monitoring, and evaluation, but not data only for the bus company, not data only for the metro company, data that cuts across all of the constituents. Now, with that in mind, you can start looking at the impact of events. We looked at Cyclone Naiva in November 2020, that impacted 100,000 people in Chennai, as well as the impact of COVID. Again, with cell phone data, we are able to see how people change their pattern of mobility, right? So the travel time from metro areas that typically take 30 minutes started taking hours. And most people, the grayish area on the right-hand side, didn't move, right? So that's a way of starting to understand the type of issues. Second, as Prasanna mentioned, people then reverted to walking. So the yellow bar shows the proportion of trips, and you can see how walking on the right-hand column increased in all the districts across all categories of people as the cyclone hit. Likewise, they look at the level of mobility across the space can be analyzed to understand the impact of things like lockdowns, strict lockdowns or relaxed lockdowns on mobility pattern. Here we looked at this across the city in terms of the kilometers traveled by capita. We also looked at it at the level of foot traffic to bus stop, which naturally was very seriously impacted by by COVID and the restriction coming with it. So all of this to say that, you have an opportunity moving now away from discrete event to think about how do you create a system that recognizes vulnerabilities. That means mapping things like flooding and how the transport network has some areas that are physically exposed, or systems like hospital and the like that are critical lifeline that need to be connected, or specific area where the socioeconomics are less favorable. And by combining on this map, the level of flood impacts that we can expect with the black dots, which represent the bus stop, you can start having an understanding of where to focus to reduce vulnerabilities. So let me come to solutions. The first solution is there is no question that today, to move forward on mobility, you need those UMTAs that have been talked about for 2 decades to start becoming more effective. What does it mean? In the context of Chennai, in the project that we just approved in September, we are working on the KUMTA that starts from the vision, the CMP, is looking then at creating multimodal integration, is looking at digital integration and data management so that you can look at the mobility across subsectors of transport, is looking at ways of channeling the financing in a systemic way across agencies so that it responds to the vision for the city, and also looks at policies and adjustments in regulations that could support the mobility vision. The second part of integration has to do with the service and infrastructure. How do you design a system that is going to be able to withstand adverse conditions, sea level rise, flooding, COVID, and continue moving? Second, how do you create a system that is going to provide redundancy in case a core backbone, let's say a metro, is not able to function? How do you create a system that encourages resourcefulness by citizens by providing them all the information to find an alternative if what they are used to is disrupted by a special event? And last but not least, how do you create a system that responds rapidly to special events of this kind? In all cases, by the way, walkable space plays absolutely a critical role. So let's not forget that in investments. Now, to illustrate that, even when times are normal and you think about accessibility to jobs across an urban space, you can see that if you were just walking to jobs in the city, a metropolitan area like Chennai, you would access only 8% of the job within 60 minutes. If you're looking at rail only, you would get 17%. If you look at bus only, you get 25%. But when you get all the modes combined, you get 30%. The combination works the same way during special event to give you a better result, COVID accepted, obviously. The next pillar of integration is finance. So far, a lot of the financing for urban mobility in India has been allocated for projects as opposed to programs serving a vision. As a result, there is underinvestment in walkability, underinvestment in bus service, and more emphasis on mega projects. The next move can be to look at it from a more multi-year budgetary process based on the vision for the city and the comprehensive mobility plan. That then allows stability and certainty of resource allocation that allows companies to start planning for a business approach to delivering service. Exactly the point Prasanna was mentioning. Instead of coming to beg for some resources, a clear business plan with funding that is clearly defined upfront allows then the city, the STUs to perform properly. Now, this can be linked in terms of support to KPIs, key performance indicators, and service delivery requirements that the companies are expected to deliver against that certainty of resources. Last but not least, we see a lot of effort to diversify the source of funding for mobility so that you have more resilience in the system. Last point I wanted to cover is that having done all of this, you still need to make sure that the use of resources is going to be efficient. So taking the example of e-buses, which is really being talked a lot across all the mega cities in India at this point, we looked at the cost of procuring e-buses with the current FAME 2 contract. We looked at what could be done to the master concession agreement to make it more bankable, less tilted, and more, give you better results. We look at the way to unbundle maybe bus service from bus provision in ways that could better link risk and return profile and facilitate access to finance, and how to improve the revenue generated by those buses by optimizing the routes based on the granular understanding developed through data. What it means is that when you go through all of these steps, a VGF, variability gap funding of 29 rupees, that would be our starting point, can be squeezed to something like 6.5, 7 rupees. And that's very significant because it means that from a public sector perspective, you can get 4 to 5 times more for your money in terms of service delivered.
Sorry to interrupt, Jared. Yes. 2 minutes, you'll have to wrap up in 2 minutes.
Absolutely, and that's exactly the timing, so that's fine. The World Bank on our side, we are looking at things that like payment security, guaranteed payment to private operators on the basis of contracts that are formulated across those new principles, first loss facilities for banks that would be lending, so that access to financing for bus companies is facilitated. So in conclusion, the COVID impact and certainly climate consideration, which are really the talk of the day with COP26 coming up, offer a real opportunity for a deep urban mobility rethink. From 2006 to now, there has not been so much rethink in terms of the implementation of a principle. So now is a good time to rethink it. Resilience is not any longer something that is put aside. It has to be core of any mobility vision. And the foundations are a granular understanding of user-centric requirements with effective institutional mechanism, the funding and financing that goes with it, and efficiency in the service delivery so that you get more for the money available. And at the end of the day, the big transformational force is the granularity of data, like cell phone data and others, that allows you to understand where the true resilience gaps are within your city, not only as a one digit, but in a very granular, spatially distributed manner. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerald, for a very interesting presentation. And what I took away from it is that there needs to be a holistic approach cutting across physical assets, operation, governance, financing, while planning for building resilience into our transport systems. And the government and the cities need to make investments to make the transport more resilient, particularly the public transport and the non-motorized transport. I hope you were able to hear me.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
Did you hear what I said, Jared?
Yes, I could hear you well. Yes, okay. Very good. Very good.
So thank you for that very insightful presentation. Now I move on to my last the speaker of the evening of this session, to Mr. Marshall Chavarel, who's the president of ATECS ITS. Marshall has over 30 years of experience in the field of ITS. He was the business innovation director at Aegis and has been involved with multiple projects across France and other countries. He's the co-founder of ATEC ITS France and is a member of multiple committees and was involved with the French Department of Transport for National Traffic Information Policy, coordination and operations for summer holidays, and development of new technologies. So I hand it over to Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also for having invited me to this session. I will try to do my best to respect the time, but I think I can do it. In summary, I will, of course, explain what is ITS France. In fact, to make it short, ITS France. And then I will give a view about COVID-19 and transport system resilience from a feedback from the French case, which is very similar to, in fact, what I heard from India and New Delhi. And then I will just conclude from a message concerning the mobility resilience, which has to be in fact extended in my point of view, and I think it's comforted by the preceding speaker to resilience of smart city in general. So just a few words about ITS France. It's a network for concerning smart mobility. It was created in 1973, but at that time we are not talking about new technology, not ITS. It was ITAC only. It became ITS France in 2000, just to follow a movement from an international level concerning the new technology, what we call intelligent transport system, and ITS. There are ITS association in many countries in the world, and we are working together also exchanging. So in France, we have 300 members coming from more than 100 organizations, and it's really a public-private collaboration, because in our association, it's an NGO. We have the public sector, the Ministry of Transport, of course, but also big transport operators like national railways, but also a smart startup and public and private organization. Okay, so our role is really to lead this professional network, to inform our members about the latest innovations that could serve for improving the mobility. In fact, just to summarize, to bringing together all the actors of intelligent transport and to contribute to project, and of course promoting French initiative in this domain. Our actions can be split in different axes. We have work groups, and we produce white papers that contain in general a recommendation to the government and to the authorities to act on some aspects in order to improve mobility for all. We have a working group on mass mobility as a service, on big data and autonomous vehicle, which is coming more and more important in the term of mobility, on logistics, and especially on low carbon mobility, what we call decarbonization, if I can say simply. And digital, what is concerning what digital aspect called the data at the heart of our work concerning this recommendation. We have a magazine, a quarterly magazine, and we have an annual congress. Unfortunately, we are not able to have this congress this year, but we'll have, of course, in next January. Feedback from concerning the situation in France. When I heard what you said concerning India, it's very similar. The consequence of the pandemic is that it has really dramatically changed the modal split in favor of individual modes. Of course, we are walking the bicycle, scooter for short distance, but individual car for longer distance, meaning that people that maybe using public transport decided for sanitary reason to use their individual car for going to work. So the consequence of that is that we have less travel in mass transit, around a 30% decrease in the big city, big metropolitan area like Paris area. And of course, one would say positive aspect is that it was also in a promotion of teleworking, and then we notice less travel in general, mainly from white collar, around 50% at one period concerning the teleworking, but only for blue collar there is also a big increase, but they don't represent a lot in terms of travel in major city. So in terms of using teleworking, of course, concerning blue collar. So having said that, it was the authorities decided to first adapt the infrastructure and developed what we call in French, Corona piste, Corona lanes. It was a lanes dedicated lane for cyclists and scooters, non-electrical scooters. And this was a very big trend concerning all cities in France to adapt the infrastructure in order to facilitate the use of these modes. First, in other measures was to encourage, of course, teleworking and encourage walking, cycling. But what we notice is that, in fact, most of the people who changed to walk or to cycle were people that before were taking the public transport. That's why we have this decrease of in mass transit, which is important, in which of course cause a problem for the operating companies because of the operating cost that was not diminishing at the same level, of course. So so during this period, as this association at ITS France, we form a working group with, of course, supported by the Ministry of Charge of Transport, and also the main public transport operators, National Railways, Transdev Colis, or ATP, which is Paris Metro, of course, you know, I suppose. The objective was to identify, in addition to what has been done concerning infrastructure, it was also to identify digital solutions and services for accompanying measures. Some of them, for example, was try to monitor the social distancing in addition to marking in station, in vehicles and video. The idea was to try to monitor that in order to recommend change in behavior and to limit the crowds in some stations. I would say that most of an important aspect is that it's a communication to user in order to not to convince, but to try to make understandable what the measures that we're taking. So the warning of users on influence in station was also an action before they come, and thanks to also of course, the information from the public transport operators, but also from all the let's say mobility services that are now very common in France, and I think in many countries in the world that are what we call GAFA, Google, Amazon, Google, of course, City Mapper, all this kind of thing, were also contributed to this information to users in order that they avoid the stations that were crowded. Acceleration of contactless payments, of course. So there is a big plan anyway in France for going more and more on contactless payment in public transport, and the pandemic was also a reason for accelerating this deployment of this solution, and also, of course, adaptation of transport offer to demand. Sorry for that. Sorry. So the trying to now we have a situation. The problem is that a situation where we have less people in public transport. We have more, of course, more people walking or cycling to going in for to work, but it represents only a weak part of the problem. And in opposition, we have an increase in individual use of personal cars to go to work, and this is causing many traffic jams in the metropolitan area. And the question now is how to go back to the normal situation, to the situation before. And this is really a matter of concern for authorities and all the actors, the economic actors, because there is, of course, consequences concerning the economic activity. So there is really now a need for drawing lessons from this pandemic situation and try to to influence the modal split. In fact, in particularly because now we have to also, suppose you have also working on that, there is a problem of diminishing the CO2 emission in order to diminish, to alleviate the problem due to the climate change. And this is really a challenge. That's why we think that the resilience is really a continuous improvement approach. And I think I fully agree with what was said just by before. It's not only a question, resilience for mobility also is involving not only the transport itself, the transport infrastructure or the metro and so on. It's also a general approach in order that the city becomes resilient. Because we think that we will have to face in the coming years many disturbances due to climate change, like storms, flooding, and maybe, and I don't hope so, but some sanitary situations that could also affect the situation. So that's why we say, sorry.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. We need to wrap up now.
2 minutes, yes. So we need really a need to an holistic approach. And transport networks are, of course, interconnected, but they rely also on energy network. If there's electric power, there is no train, no metro, and no traffic lights. And so we rely also more and more on telecommunication in order to manage all this transport. And in case of disruption of the transport of telecommunication, there is consequences concerning the mobility. So the resilient concept is really becoming a cutting edge in urban management and design. There are more and more to take uncertainty into account. And the urban system is very complex, and there are many interrelations between public with urban development, buildings, and transport network. And this has to be really to be taken into account as really an holistic approach. And we have to, of course, to adapt to changing constraints. In conclusion, what is to be said is that co-working with all stakeholders fits the whole approach of resilience. In fact, I say that because I was, before being retired, I have been involved in projects concerning this approach of resilience in city. And this is, for me, very, very important to tackle this aspect. Thank you for your attention. I hope I was not too much confused, but I have short time to prepare my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm ready, of course, to answer any question.
Thank you, Marshall, for sharing your experience in France with the post-pandemic situation. And as I can see from your presentation, the post-pandemic situation in France is not very different from what we are facing in India. And it was interesting to learn about the digital measures that have been taken. We have a question and answer session, but most of the questions that have been asked have already been addressed or are not relevant. So I would just, from my own side, pose a few questions. One is to Laghu. Laghu, what we have not covered or we did not see in your presentation, or maybe we did and I missed, was the impact on freight, especially on delivery and the e-commerce. Were there any patterns there?
Yeah, yes, I did briefly mention that, but you're right, it needs to be in little more detail. Yeah, e-commerce has taken up a leap growth in last 1 year. If you look at various e-commerce organization also has grown up their businesses. And apparently, which I wanted to mention also, that while this is taking up growth, we may require to come up with the various infrastructure requirement for the e-commerce vehicles and the regulations also at the same time, not only to facilitate them and to ensure the safety aspects and all these things. So yes, this is something which is we may have to take up in recent time.
Thank you. Dr. Mangu Singh, just a thought. obviously your ridership is much lower. It is now climbing back up, and hopefully once the government lifts the restrictions, it will reach the pre-pandemic level. But 2 years is a long time. So are there any expectations? Is there a framework available through which the public transport operators, whether in public or private, could receive some support or some steps which the government could take to reinvigorate the PT sector?
I think it's a very valid question. In fact, if you see, as far as metros are concerned, which are sanctioned in the country through the SPV model like Delhi Metro, this is already there inbuilt in the sanctioned by the cabinet. It clearly spells out that if in case of any deficiency in the shortfall in the operational revenue, loss will be shared by the two governments. This was for our phase 1 and phase 2. But subsequent phases, phase 3 onward and all other metros in the country, the sanction order by the cabinet clearly stipulates that in such scenario, loss will be made up by the concerned state government. So this is the situation, and that was contemplated even for normal operation if there is a loss. This is a situation which is beyond the control of the operator and not because of any inefficiency on the part of the operator. So we have written to the governments. In our case, there are actually 4 governments: central government, Delhi government, UP and Haryana. We have apportioned this shortfall in revenue, and we have requested to recoup that as per the sanction order of the cabinet.